Imagine looking at a map of Europe and realizing that the tale of its castles isn't just about mighty stone walls or gallant knights, but about why some lands, like the Netherlands, stand apart from their neighbors with a strangely barren landscape, at least when it comes to grand medieval fortresses. Here's the big question. Why does the Netherlands, a country surrounded by castle-filled Germany and Belgium, have so few of its own? The truth, as you'll see, is bigger than bricks and battlements. It's a winding story of mud, money, stubbornness, and some seriously wild historical plot twists. Let's cut right to the chase with a headline that rivals any fairy tale. While Germany boasts over 25,000 castles and even little Belgium has more than 3,000, the Netherlands can only lay claim to about 600 to 700 surviving castles. That's it. And it gets even weirder. Historians estimate the Dutch built somewhere between 1,200 and 1,300 in total, meaning, at best, half of all Dutch castles are gone, erased. Sometimes it's as if they never existed. So how did the land of canals and windmills end up so bereft of castle grandeur? To get to the bottom of it, you have to understand that the Dutch castle was never quite like its German or Belgian cousin in the first place. If you conjure up the image of a stone giant perched atop a rugged cliff, you'll be disappointed in Holland. Dutch castles, or castellan, were usually built low and level, nestled close to rivers, surrounded by marshland and mud. Picture more moats and reeds than grand mountain vistas. Why? Well, much of the Netherlands was and is basically a soggy patchwork below sea level. Not exactly prime real estate for knights dreaming of an epic military stronghold. But don't write the Dutch off as less medieval or less noble. Their fortresses were often designed more as fortified homes. Think cozy family headquarters with a defensive air. You can see echoes of this in places like Slot Loevestein or the much-fought-over Meiderslot. These castles weren't meant to withstand massive, months-long sieges from entire kingdoms. They were practical, built to guard family, livestock, a pittance of wealth. When the German, French, and English medieval lords built with stone, the Dutch usually started with wood. Because stone wasn't local, it had to be imported, and it was expensive. And here comes a surprise. This combination of landscape and economics made the Dutch castle an entirely different beast. Instead of soaring high for visibility, Dutch castles squatted for defense and to shield themselves from the wind. Instead of becoming impregnable, they gambled on quick defenses and strategic placement. If you lived in Gelderland or Utrecht, your castle might well be reduced to a glorified fortified farmhouse. The trade-driven heartbeat of Dutch life made these merchant towns lively melting pots, buzzing with commerce and cultural exchange rather than the tense militarized air of typical medieval strongholds. Streets were alive with foreign merchants hawking spices, fabrics, or grains, while guilds managed the intricate balance of trade and craftsmanship. As members of the influential Hanseatic League, Dutch cities wielded economic clout, negotiating treaties, forming powerful alliances, and at times even enforcing embargoes to protect their interests. Wealthy burghers and city leaders were the new architects of authority, transforming civic pride into splendid market squares, grand city halls, and water clock towers ringing out over bustling ports. In this atmosphere, cooperation and ingenuity overshadowed brute force, leaving behind a landscape where canals outnumbered keeps, and merchant ships ruled the waters far more effectively than castles ever could. The Dutch didn't just survive the Middle Ages, they thrived and set the blueprint for a society where prosperity flowed not from conquest, but from innovation and unity. So, if your mental image of the Middle Ages is lords clinking goblets while peasants cower behind immense walls, you'll find something completely different along the Dutch waterways. Instead of castles dominating every horizon, you'd find moated manor houses, town walls, sometimes just a single sturdy tower at the edge of a dike. And this wasn't because the Dutch were less interested in power or prestige. It's that power and prestige came from being a skilled merchant or a leading city official, not a distant lord hiding behind walls. But don't mistake a lack of castles for a lack of drama. There were wars, lots of them. The infamous Hook and Cod Wars tore the region apart for over a century, beginning in the 14th century and dragging on and on. Two rival noble factions took turns capturing castles, laying sieges, and crucially, demolishing what they couldn't keep. It was brutal, messy, and short-sighted. Castles like Oud Haarlem and Rosenborg were destroyed, never to be rebuilt. Even showpieces like Slot Zuilen suffered serious damage. You may be wondering, didn't that happen everywhere in Europe? Didn't castles everywhere get attacked? Yes, but in the Dutch lowlands, destruction was often more final. The terrain didn't lend itself to resurrecting a fallen fortress. Once a castle was smashed and sunk into the damp earth, it was rarely rebuilt, and sometimes it was even deliberately erased. Water has always played the role of both creator and destroyer in the Netherlands, a force as relentless as any army. Entire communities learned to live in a perpetual state of anticipation, because the next storm surge could turn the familiar landscape into a watery wilderness overnight. Rivers like the Rhine and Meuse not only carved trade routes, but also brought unpredictable floods that tested the endurance of man and stone alike. Stories abound of castles crumbling after relentless winters, their walls giving way as the marshes crept ever closer and moats spilled over. Imagine noble families waking up to find their storied halls transformed into islets adrift in a boundless, muddy expanse, while villagers scrambled to salvage what they could from the ruins. For centuries, the Dutch wrestled with water management, a constant cycle of building, repairing, and sometimes conceding to nature. In this low-lying country, even the formidable engineering of dikes and canals often provided only temporary respite, and the specter of flooding shaped not just the geography, but the mindset and resilience of generations. Think about that. In most of Europe, the land shapes the power, but here, the water dictates everything. Why build a towering stone fortress if one errant storm can turn it into an island or wash it into the sea? Instead, Dutch communities spent their collective wealth on what actually mattered: dikes, pumps, and windmills. Castles were left behind, but economics played its part as well. As the Dutch Republic rose in the 16th and 17th centuries, the country's focus shifted ever more intensely toward trade. What was once a land of squabbling counts and preening barons became a patchwork of thriving cities: Amsterdam, Rotterdam, Utrecht, all with their own sturdy walls and citizen militias. The merchant class took over from the old feudal order. Wealthy burghers and city fathers weren't interested in rebuilding castles lost to war or water. They had more efficient ways to protect themselves: canals, city gates, professional soldiers, and perhaps most importantly, naval power. The sea itself became their fortress. Let's pause here. Isn't this a fascinating inversion? In other parts of Europe, the memory of the castle is the memory of feudal power. In the Netherlands, it's evidence of that power's decline. The most critical battles weren't for ancient family homesteads, but for control of rivers, trade lanes, commerce, and cities. As the drums of war echoed through the lowlands, the landscape itself became a chessboard of shifting strategies and desperate measures. Castles that once projected dominance and dignity stood suddenly vulnerable, their thick walls no longer safe havens but dangerous targets in a vicious cycle of occupation and destruction. Spanish troops seized fortresses, determined to break the Dutch spirit, yet every victory was tenuous. Loyalists turned rebels fought back with fire and fury. A captured castle could become a rallying point for occupying forces, so Dutch resistance leaders made the hard choice: level their own strongholds rather than allow the enemy a foothold. Flames swept through ancient halls, towers tumbled, and scars spread across the countryside as ruination became both a weapon and a warning. The stakes were survival, not nostalgia, and whole generations saw the legacy of stone vanish overnight in the name of freedom. Some ruins, like those at Teylingen, lingered as haunting shells, reminders of a time when security demanded sacrifice and the ambition for independence outweighed even the love of history. In these ashes, the Dutch Golden Age would ultimately rise, forged from the loss and determination of a land fighting for its soul. You can see echoes of this ruthless efficiency today. Visit the Dutch countryside and people will point to place names where grand castles once stood. Places like Valkhof in Nijmegen or the lost walls of Utrecht, and shrug. What's gone is gone, and in the Dutch mind, survival and progress always wins out over nostalgic clinging to the past. The economics of erasure is even starker when you consider what remained after the wars. Land was precious. Every square meter mattered. Why let castle ruins blight valuable farmland or city space when the rooms could be scavenged for brick and timber, the moats filled in for grazing or canals, the lands repurposed for more productive uses? In some cases, castles were literally dismantled and recycled, their stones turned into city walls, churches, or even houses. Isn't there something almost modern in the Dutch approach? There's a clear-eyed practicality. If a castle can't pay its way, defend itself, or answer a real economic need, down it goes. A merchant country needs merchants' houses, not dusty relics. An agricultural land needs good fields, not crumbling moats. And yet, the story isn't just one of loss. A handful of castles did survive, and their survival is almost as fascinating as their destruction. Why do some remain while others vanished? The answer, as you might expect, has everything to do with geography and luck. Those few castles built on higher, drier ground, protected from the worst of the floods, managed to outlast their luckier cousins. Some, like the Meiderslot, became museums, their new role as tourist attraction and icons securing a legacy that centuries of war could not destroy. Notice how none of these survivors sits atop a dramatic mountain. They're all closer to rivers, in places less vulnerable to extreme flooding or the pressures of expanding cities. The ones that failed to adapt or reinvent themselves simply disappeared from the landscape. Now imagine for a moment what the story of Dutch castles might teach about the Netherlands as a whole. Here is a society that has always had to manage risk, to trade security for flexibility, to see value in what's practical and useful rather than what merely looks impressive. If you loved exploring the lost castles and surprising history of the Netherlands, show your support by liking, sharing, and subscribing for more deep dives into the stories behind Europe's landscapes. Your engagement helps these tales travel farther. So spread the word, join the conversation, and keep history alive with every click.